Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacaster with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Instruction, Education, and Improving You as Players. Today's topic is going to be heavy armour, since, well, that's rather been catching on a lot lately. After the recent patch, there's been an increase overall in heavy tanks being utilised by all sides. Tiger tanks, IS-2s, well, Pershings, didn't really see a drop off, but, King Tigers, and even some Churchill tanks. As that's been happening now, of course, that sort of, requires what are sort of the basics in sort of utilising a heavy armour efficiently, and to an extent, of course, also countering. I mean, overall, one thing to keep in mind is, you have to try and be careful with Führer syndrome, which, for those who aren't aware, basically means you just play for the biggest tank, ignoring everything else in the process, usually hurting your own tank, just to be able to go up for the big tank as soon as possible. Meaning, if your opponent has tanked even decently, just countered, set up to counter decently, your entire, logistical system will be completely sunk once you then very quickly lose the Tiger, because usually people with Führer syndrome also tend to perform not very well with the heavy tank, because overall they rather utilise it tactically poorly, either the fact just use it incredibly sparingly because they're then afraid to lose it, because if they lose it, they got nothing else, or they'll just, throw it in and get it destroyed very easily. I mean, there some can use it well, but those are on the rarer end of the spectrum. So, I mean, overall, strategically, you generally don't want to rush straight away for a target. And if you do kind of want to get to fuel cash up, you generally want to get a heavy tank or Tiger, IS-2, Pershing, whatever, after getting a few medium tanks, because that way the target tank can usually perform as part of a larger force, rather than just, this thing you're throwing on your own. And that's usually where heavy tanks tend to perform the best, when they're part of a larger force, where there's numerous threats that can sort of, deal damage, and where the Tiger tank just, the IS-2 or the Pershing or the King Tiger or whatever, I keep calling Tiger because I'm staring at a Tiger here, by the way, but that way, it's just sort of the spearhead, while there's still, the rest of the spear to deliver, proper impact as well. So that's, I think, one thing to keep in mind there. Generally, the heavy tank performs better when it's part of a larger combined arms force. It can work decently well on its own, but generally should be really careful. And even then, as you're in one-on-one engagement, your Tiger runs into IS-2 again, or whatever, runs into a large enemy force, the Tiger tends, or the IS-2 again, I'm a bit tired as well, tends not to perform frightfully well, so it can very easily get focused damage, which is generally not what you want to happen. I mean, again, it can soak up damage to an extent, but at the same time, it's on its own, it gets, focused down too fast, and there's not much in effect to your opponent doing it. Usually the best part is your opponent focuses down, but that means ignoring a lot of other targets, and they can deal a lot of the damage you really want. In this regard, part of a heavy tank's appeal is it, it draws attention. It's a large magnet, obviously, but again, that has benefits then for the rest of your force. So again, this is generally a benefit in having a larger force, where the heavy tank can act partly again as a magnet for your opponent's attention and anger, which again can then help preserve the rest of your forces. So generally, working your heavy tanks together with other units tend to long term be the best idea. And lastly, you should always be careful about just rushing for the heavy tank. Again, try to avoid Führer syndrome. I mean, sometimes get away with it, even then, if you do go for the heavy tank first, you have to ensure it has medium armor support at long term. Otherwise, again, things get tricky. Obviously, if your opponent rushes out a heavy tank first, you can theoretically get away with it, but at the same time, there's certainly a few things to keep in mind there. So to an extent, that covers already a bunch of the strategy and the tactics to it. But again, overall, work the heavy tank together with a larger force, try to flank if possible. Don't go for deep flanks, since it's much harder to get a heavy tank out of a sticky situation. They're beginning like, decent flanks against part of a larger assault can be quite effective. That way, again, you can also maximize the tight heavy tank's survival, because again, it's going to hit from an angle they aren't quite anticipating, at which point it has more shock effect. And then on top of that, its survivability makes it hard just, to quickly get out, knocked out, so you can also more quickly extract it from the fighting bin. Deeper flanks is something you should be careful with the heavy tanks, since again they have a much harder time getting out of those comparatively. So that is, I think, very important to keep in mind as well. And of course, try to support them with a variety of weapons. Other tanks works great, because again, either going to have to focus on the Tiger tank or whatever, or they're going to have to focus on the mediums, usually working together with it in those cases. And again, usually means they're going to focus down the heavy tank, at which point your medium can then be allowed to just fire away freely, and usually they can also lay down some pretty good damage upon your opponents. Again, that can have its advantages in a lot of ways. Mods to smoke down, certain defensive elements like anti-tank guns is pretty good, because certainly makes it your tigers and whatever's play a lot more aggressively, because again there's less chance of them immediately getting focused down by your opponent's anti-tank defenses. So that is also really important. Of course, pioneers, you at least need 2 engineer squads, or whatever repair squads, to get the heavy tank fixed up fast, because otherwise it's just going to take too long. Usually all of these heavy tanks have a lot of health, so again, the longer they just sit back there doing nothing, the more of a waste of resources they are to you. So as a rule of thumb, you always want 2 repair squads minimum to be able to quickly fix up your heavy tanks. Otherwise, again, they risk spending too much time on the sidelines doing nothing, being basically a huge drain. So that's also very important to keep in mind there, sort of on a tactical strategic level, or the operative level there, if you will. Ensuring that your tiger tank can thusly, or whatever tank, again, I'm tired, can get back into the fight as efficiently as possible, as fast as possible, because you want it on the field as much as possible, pressuring your opponent and making life miserable for your opponent. So that is, I think, also a vital element there when it comes to utilizing heavy tanks, and certainly should not be underestimated or ignored. So I think that sort of largely covers the tactical and strategic implication of using heavy tanks for the most part. Again, try to use as much together with it, and of course keep it properly supported. Don't just rush blindly into it. And of course, another reason to also get pioneer units out or whatever is also get mines people to avoid getting into mines, because now we're coming to countering it. And again, one of the things that really usually screw a heavy tank is mines, because again, all of a sudden they tend not to be the fastest. The tiger tank and the Persian can be fast, but even then it slows them down, makes them much harder to maneuver about, and that makes them easier target for any sort of counters you want to take them out, and that's really helpful. So I mean, anything you do to slow them down, for example, helps out a ton. Applies to most tanks, but even more so a field to heavy tanks. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Then mines can be a really important thing. Of course, snares of any tank type, like panzerfaust, anti-tank grenades and the likes, can also be quite helpful. But mines will have that advantage; they don't require troops to get close, since heavy tanks can usually punish those. A couple of anti-tank positioned correctly can also help with it, but of course they can also be targets for the opponent's force. So in that regard, they should be properly guarded so they don't get rushed. And again, while they're then trying to focus on from the target, they then just rush up and clear out your anti-tank guns. So those are some things to keep in mind. Then of course, tank destroyers, while some of them got nerfed, even then they are still pretty good counters as long as they are properly utilized and supported. Jacks of course now require something to spot for them, and Stugs definitely require more than one Stug G, for example, to take them on. But still, tank destroyers can this way also be quite useful, in part because they're less easily rushed due to being more self-propelled and thusly mobile compared to anti-tank guns. They can react better to any heavily armored threats. So that, I think, is also a good thing to keep in mind. If you're going for medium armor, you can do that, but you got to focus much more on flanking instead of trying to attack the tank head on. Try to flank it, hit the rear armor, and that way deal with it. In particular, get your opponent to, like, for example, split off his heavy tank, doing something similar, like again full Fuhrer syndrome, sneaking up behind and then taking out the tiger can, that way really have an impact, say rushing a bunch of T-34s or Shermans. So again, you really want to emphasize getting behind the tank and taking out. You do not want to be slugging out with them. This is what technically you can probably get away with. The RNG could just as well screw you over, and of course even then you have to get really lucky to sort of have a chance. As again, you're trying to flank and out maneuver tends to be long term a better tactical approach that's going to cost you a lot less tanks as well, a lot fewer tanks as well in the process. So I'd say that's generally also much more advisable. So I think that sort of overall covers heavy tanks and the tactical and strategic implications here in our post-nerf meta right now, and overall of course a bunch of tactical measures there, and thoughts on how to use them. So hopefully this video helps you getting more your tigers, your IS-2s, your Persians, your king tigers and whatnot. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment on it. And if you like what to do, you can supporting my PayPal or pledging on Patreon. Links are in the video description. This is Imperial Lynching. Cheers, thank you for watching. See you all another day for another video. Cheers.